The nightmare Emiliano Martinez had spent years trying to avoid has finally become reality. And this time it happened in front of the entire football world. The most painful part is that it did not happen on a pitch during a penalty shootout or in the middle of one of those calculated provocations that made him famous. It happened inside an office, surrounded by cold numbers, contracts, salaries, projections, and financial calculations that no scream, no medal, and no heroic save can change. Only a few weeks after Argentina suffered a heartbreaking defeat in the 2026 World Cup final, one of Italy's biggest and most historic clubs has delivered Dibu a verdict that hurts far more than any football defeat. A verdict that does not simply close one door, but reveals something the Argentine goalkeeper may have been refusing to confront for a very long time. And what this decision could actually mean for the next chapter of his career may be much more damaging than anyone initially expected. In Argentina, Emiliano Martinez remains almost untouchable. He is the goalkeeper who helped Argentina lift the World Cup in 2022, the penalty specialist who became a national hero overnight, the man who built an entire international reputation around impossible saves, psychological battles, provocative celebrations, and an almost supernatural ability to make himself the center of attention when the pressure reaches its highest point. But club football has never treated him with the same generosity as the national team. For years, Dibu has been connected with the kind of enormous European move that should naturally arrive for a goalkeeper with his reputation. Manchester United, Inter Milan, and several other major clubs have been mentioned. Every transfer window his name appears again. Rumors explode across Europe and supporters start wondering if this will finally be the summer when Martinez leaves Aston Villa. Yet somehow, every single time, he ends up back at Villa Park, almost as if an invisible force keeps pulling him toward the same place he has wanted to escape for so long. This summer, however, everything appeared different. For the first time, it looked genuine. It looked serious. And the mysterious Italian giant was none other than Juventus. This was no longer just another transfer rumor with no foundation. Reports coming out of Italy suggested that Martinez was genuinely interested in joining the project, that personal terms had been discussed, that a 3-year contract had been considered, and that Dibu was even prepared to accept a reduction in salary to make the move happen. At almost 34 years old, this could have been the final major opportunity of his career. The last chance to move to a truly elite European club while still arriving as an established first-choice goalkeeper rather than as a short-term solution. Everything seemed to be lining up. And then, almost without warning, Juventus killed the deal. They studied the entire operation, examined the numbers, reviewed the risks, calculated the long-term cost, and eventually walked away. The verdict was brutally simple. Emiliano Martinez was considered too expensive. But here is where the story becomes much more uncomfortable, because the issue was not necessarily some outrageous transfer fee demanded by Aston Villa. Reports placed Villa's asking price at around 10 million euros, with Juventus reportedly looking at an even lower figure, 10 million euros for a World Cup winning goalkeeper. And still, Juventus said no. That is exactly where the real question begins. When one of Europe's biggest clubs looks at a relatively modest transfer fee and still decides that the complete package is not worth the investment, then it becomes obvious that the transfer fee was never the only problem. Martinez turns 34 in September. His salary remains substantial. His resale value is almost non-existent, and Juventus would not be buying the beginning of a long-term project. They would be paying for the final chapters of a goalkeeper's career. Club football can be absolutely ruthless when the numbers stop making sense on a spreadsheet. Argentina sees the medals. Recruitment departments see the age. Argentina remembers the penalty saves. Financial directors see the salary. Supporters remember Qatar. Juventus has to calculate what Dibu will be worth 2 or 3 years from now, and apparently the answer they found did not convince them. But there is another part of Martinez's profile that is much harder to measure in a spreadsheet. His reputation. Dibu has spent years turning provocation into an art form. He transformed penalty shootouts into psychological warfare. He talks to opponents, delays the restart, tries to disrupt concentration, celebrates directly in front of players who have just missed, and deliberately makes himself impossible to ignore. Argentina loves him precisely because of that personality, while rival supporters often hate him for exactly the same reason. And on several occasions, That behavior has crossed the invisible line separating entertainment from serious disciplinary trouble. FIFA has suspended him before, including a 2-match international ban connected to an obscene gesture involving a trophy and a confrontation with a television camera operator. Instead of destroying his reputation in Argentina, those episodes often made him even more popular. Dibu became the perfect villain, the character everyone outside Argentina wanted to see defeated. But there is a huge difference between a national team embracing that chaos for a handful of international windows each year and a club having to live with that same energy every week throughout an entire season. A dressing room is different. A club environment is different. The pressure is different. And suddenly, every part of the Martinez package has to be considered together. Then came another World Cup surrounded by controversy. Argentina reached the 2026 final, but the road there was anything but peaceful. Following the dramatic semi-final victory over England, an Argentine flag carrying the Malvinas slogan appeared during the celebrations, turning what should have been a pure football moment into an international political controversy. FIFA immediately focused disciplinary attention on the incident. Martinez was never formally identified as the central figure responsible for that flag, and there is no evidence proving that Juventus abandoned the transfer because of that specific episode. But the timing is impossible to ignore. Dibu came out of another World Cup carrying defeat, controversy, and the same provocative image that has followed him for years. Then, shortly afterward, one of Europe's biggest clubs examined the entire situation and decided to step away. That does not establish a direct cause and effect relationship, but it makes the decision far more uncomfortable to analyze. Because Juventus did not stop looking for a goalkeeper after rejecting Emiliano Martinez. They simply started looking for someone else. And that distinction changes everything. Juventus did not decide that it could survive without strengthening the position. The club decided that Martinez was not worth the particular investment required to complete the deal. Suddenly, other names entered the conversation. Younger goalkeepers, different financial structures, players who could potentially provide greater value over the next several seasons. In the space of a few days, Dibu went from being the superstar supposedly being chased by a European giant to becoming the expensive option that the same club was willing to replace. For a goalkeeper repeatedly described as one of the best in the world, that is a devastating reality. It strikes directly at the pride of a player who has already achieved almost everything internationally. Because if Dibu really sits at the absolute top of the goalkeeper market, then why does this keep happening? Why has the huge European move never fully arrived? Why is a World Cup winner, Copa America champion, and globally recognized goalkeeper still tied to Aston Villa, while other goalkeepers from his generation have moved to clubs competing regularly in the Champions League? There are perfectly reasonable answers. Aston Villa is not a small club. They value Martinez highly. He has a strong contract, he remains an important part of the squad, and the right buyer has to appear at exactly the right moment. But time is becoming the problem. When Dibu was 31, another summer was always waiting. 32, there was still plenty of room to be patient. At 33, one final opportunity could still emerge. Now, with 34 approaching, every transfer window carries greater weight. Juventus may have represented much more than a failed negotiation. It may have been one of his final realistic opportunities to make the jump to a European giant while still arriving as an unquestioned starting goalkeeper rather than an experienced short-term answer. And that is the real nightmare. It is not Juventus itself. It is the possibility that Juventus has reached a conclusion other elite clubs could soon reach as well. Too old, too expensive, too little resale value. Too much money committed during the final stage of a career, and perhaps a personality that brings more noise than certain clubs want to deal with behind closed doors. To be completely fair, Juventus has never publicly blamed Martinez's behavior for the failed transfer. The financial argument alone is enough to explain the decision. But when a club makes a major investment, the entire profile of a player inevitably becomes part of the calculation. Talent, trophies, salary, age, personality, media attention, and long-term value all arrive inside the same package. Argentina turned that package into an unforgettable legend. Juventus looked at the same package and decided it was a business they were unwilling to complete. And now Aston Villa once again holds most of the cards. Martinez remains under contract. Villa has already made it clear that the club would like to keep him. Unless another major European club suddenly arrives with a serious offer, Dibu could find himself exactly where he has ended up after so many previous transfer windows. Back at Aston Villa, watching another possible career-defining move disappear in front of him. The timing makes the situation even more painful. Only days earlier, Martinez could have imagined finishing the summer as a two-time World Cup champion and a new Juventus goalkeeper at the same time. Instead, Argentina lost the final. Controversy surrounded the tournament, and Juventus eventually walked away from the deal. In barely a week, the entire direction of a career can change. Emiliano Martinez is still a World Cup champion. He remains an absolute icon of Argentine football. He is still one of the most recognizable goalkeepers on the planet. But the transfer market has just delivered him a verdict much colder than anything he experienced with Argentina. International glory does not guarantee demand from Europe's elite clubs. And Juventus may have exposed the one opponent Dibu Martinez can never intimidate, distract, or defeat in a penalty shootout. That opponent is time. Because the question is no longer whether Martinez deserved to make the move to a European giant 3 years ago. The question that matters now is whether a major club will still want him today. After Juventus decided to walk away, Dibu may finally be facing the answer he spent years trying not to hear. The next transfer window could be another opportunity, but it could also become another reminder that the clock is moving faster than ever. And if no giant comes calling, the story of Emiliano Martinez in European club football may end up being remembered very differently from the legendary story he created with Argentina. A goalkeeper who conquered the biggest moments for his country could discover that the club market does not care about nostalgia, medals, or heroic memories. It cares about age, cost, risk, and what comes next. That is the brutal side of modern football. A player can be a national hero and still become a complicated investment. He can be loved by millions and still be rejected by a boardroom. He can have saved a World Cup final and still be judged by a financial projection. That is exactly what makes the Juventus decision so painful for Dibu. It was not a goalkeeper saying no to Juventus. It was Juventus deciding that the final stage of Dibu's career was not worth the price they would have to pay. And now Martinez has to respond in the only way a footballer can respond: on the pitch. If he remains at Aston Villa, every save will matter. Every mistake will matter. Every transfer rumor will carry more pressure. At his age, another season of outstanding performances could reopen doors that now appear closed, while even a small decline could convince other clubs that Juventus simply made the correct calculation. The margin for error has become smaller. The clock has become louder. And the biggest irony of all is that Dibu has spent his entire career making other people lose their nerve under pressure. He has stared down penalty takers. He has played the villain. He has embraced hostile crowds. He has turned moments of fear into moments of confidence. But this time there is no opponent standing 12 yards away from him. There is no referee to influence, no striker to distract, and no penalty kick to save. There is only the transfer market, a contract, an aging curve, and a group of executives asking whether the next 3 years justify the cost of the next 3 months. That is a battle even Emiliano Martinez cannot control with psychological games. And perhaps that is why the Juventus rejection feels so different. It is not simply another failed transfer. It could be the moment when the market finally tells Dibu what international football never did. Legends do not get unlimited time. So now the question becomes unavoidable. Will another European giant believe that Emiliano Martinez still has one more great chapter left in him? Or has the opportunity he waited for finally passed? Tell me what you think in the comments. Do you believe Dibu Martinez still has one final chance to join a major European club? Or has the train already left the station? Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next chapter of the story. And turn on notifications because the moment there is another major update about the future of Argentina's goalkeeper, you will be among the first to know.